Now on BBC One, an hour of topical discussion with David Dimbleby.
Good evening. Tonight's question time comes from Easterhouse in Glasgow. And a big welcome to our audience here and to our panel, of course, the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, Labour's Shadow Scottish Secretary down at Westminster, Margaret Curran, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Ruth Davidson, the Scottish editor of the Daily Telegraph, Alan Cochrane, and the trade union leader, Mark Serwotka. Right, and our first question tonight from Stephen Barry, please. Mr. Barry.
Why isn't the government doing more about rising gas and electricity prices when these companies are still making millions?
Why isn't the government doing more about gas and electricity prices? Mark Serwotka.
Well, that's a very good question, and the fact that they're not doing more, I think, tells us very clearly how they are completely out of touch with the everyday pressures that working men and women and people up and down the country, and particularly here in Scotland, are actually facing. And because some advisor has clearly whispered this to David Cameron, he appears off the hoof to suddenly have announced he wants to legislate now that everybody has to get the lowest tariff. And it's clear today the government are in disarray. Nobody knows what it means. And the reality is there's no good legislating for the lowest tariffs if those tariffs aren't low. I looked at the statistics here and saw that the profits made by Scottish Power and by British Gas are absolutely astronomical. And when the prices of gas goes up, we're asked to pay more. When the wholesale price of gas goes down, we still pay more. And it seems to me that what this tells us is the companies are making billions of pounds worth of profits, and they're going into their pockets and to the shareholders. And the poor consumer, who has very little choice, who has to have gas and electricity, are the ones who always get above inflation rises. The current rises are 4 times the level of what the average pay rise is. And therefore, the government, I think, need to accept that profits should not be made at times like this. Actually, I think there's a massive case to be made for nationalising the utilities and ensuring that the public owns the gas and electricity supply, and so then we can feel the benefits rather than us constantly fork out while the rich get richer and we suffer more.
Ruth Davidson, perhaps you could clarify what you think the Prime Minister was saying on behalf of the Conservative Party, and as indeed as Prime Minister, we're going to be legislating so that energy companies have to give the lowest tariff to their customers, and he's repeated it tonight. Mark says it's a bit of hogwash. Do you think it's hogwash, or does he mean it?
Well, as he said yesterday, and as he said again today in Brussels when he was asked at the European Summit, yes, there's going to be legislation brought forward in order to do exactly what this gentleman in the audience has asked us to do, to make sure that we do get a better deal for people who are seeing their power and their gas go up. The Prime Minister has acted on this already. He held an energy summit with the Big Six earlier this year. He then introduced a situation where people had to be told of better tariffs if they didn't exist. Now he said that's not enough. We need to go even further.
And why do you think he hadn't told his energy minister what he was going to say, or anybody else, it seems?
Well,
they were all today, they were all over the shop on it.
Well, I think what you've seen is, the normal function of government, which is we have seen a problem, we have identified a problem, we are looking to legislate in order to rectify that problem. We will be bringing forward details as we go forward, because we're on the side of hard-working householders that can't afford their gas and electricity bills.
Is that how you see it?
And that's what's happening in the next month. There will be an energy bill that's brought forward, the details will be explained in the House of Commons, and this will help people who are really struggling. And this is because the government is on the side of people who are struggling with gas and electricity bills.
Sounds good, Margaret Curran, doesn't it?
Well, normal perhaps is the word, because it's a normal shambles that we're getting from this government. We have the West Coast Main Line, we had the budget shambles, and now we've got the energy shambles. Actually, I was in the House of Commons when the Prime Minister made his announcement, his very clear announcement of enforcing companies to give people the lowest tariff. But the next day, within less than 24 hours, it had unravelled. His energy minister didn't know what he was talking about when he was required to go to the House of Commons today. He wouldn't confirm what the Prime Minister has said. Today we are getting announcement after announcement, but it looks as if this couldn't be delivered. we really have to understand what families are going through here. And it's now become, when we've got falling wages, it's now become one of the biggest pressures on your household income.
But hang on a second. He said in the House of Commons that you had 13 years to do this and didn't do it under Labour. And he flicks his fingers and he's done it.
Well, not that. Well, I hate to say it, hasn't clicked his fingers. Nothing has happened since his Energy Summit last year. What we announced at our conference is what you need to do is completely change the energy market. We've announced that we would want to abolish Ofgem. You need to have much more stringent control of the energy companies. You particularly have to stop the 6 big companies operating in the way they do. You need to open the books and get more transparency. And Labour is absolutely sure if they won't bring down their prices, then we will force them to do bring down their prices when they're making excessive
David, this
profits.
is a cheap shot, because Labour came out earlier this year and said that they would do exactly what this government is going to do for every household for the over 75. So to say that it can't be done is absolutely not true. This government is going to bring forward legislation, not just for over 75 households, but for all households, because they recognise the problem.
The woman in the second row there, in the striped T-shirt.
I think it's quite ironic to see both Ruth and Margaret actually arguing over this. This is reactionary politics. Successive Tory and Labour governments have allowed it to get to a stage where people are in abject fuel poverty, who are choosing whether or not they heat their house or they have food on their table. Now, this has been allowed to go for successive periods since privatisation with absolutely no regulation. The Labour Party had 13 years, like you said, and they did nothing during that time. It's very rich that now that you have no opportunity to lead the government, that you are turning around and criticising the Tories, who haven't gone far enough and are being reactionary. But both, I think you have to kind of hang your heads in shame that it's come to this position.
Alan Cochrane.
I don't think there's any doubt that this has shot right to the top of the government's list of priorities, and there is a panic at Westminster, I suspect, at number 10. What there is also is chaos and disorder about how they're going to do this. It's remarkable that Ed Davey, the Energy Minister, didn't know a single thing about this announcement by the Prime Minister, who's already said it twice. But what Cameron, I think we should give him some credit. I know that the previous speaker wouldn't give him any credit, but give him some credit. He understands the problem that only 10% of people switch from one energy company to another to get lower tariffs. So he's basically trying to get the companies, force the companies. They have been, Mark's right, they have been behaving badly. The 6 of them, they follow each other almost in sequence, putting their prices up. I think that what he's trying to do is get them on the lower tariff. But Labour's suggestion that the companies will then increase their tariffs, I dare them to do that. They wouldn't get away with it.
The man in the blue shirt up there in the third row from the back.
It seems to me that this is just another example of where profit is brought into a deregulated environment. And what shocks me, I think, is that people are surprised when companies bringing profit will be looking to make money out of it and making the most money that they possibly can.
But do you think what the Prime Minister's announced is an improvement, or do you think it's just a smokescreen for won't have any real effect?
I think it's likely to have very little effect in reality. I think it will be another fob.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, the direct answer to Stephen's question is the government should be doing much more to tackle rising energy prices. This is a really serious issue. For every 5% increase in energy prices, another 46,000 people in Scotland are pushed into fuel poverty. In energy-rich Scotland, that is an absolute and utter scandal, and it's time that something was done about it. Frankly, the way David Cameron has behaved in the past 24 hours does nothing and is an appalling way to treat families and individuals who are struggling to pay their gas and electricity bills. I think people are just fed up with tough talk on this. What they want is some meaningful action that will address the problem. Why do you not think this is
meaningful action,
well,
if he does achieve it?
Because clearly he has no idea how to achieve it. I mean, if you look back, Ed Miliband in 2008, when he was Energy Minister, said it was time to get tough with the energy companies. He failed to do anything about it. Ofgem, almost a year ago, published proposals that haven't yet been implemented. The energy bill that David Cameron talks about today was published in May. It didn't contain a single thing about consumer protection. So people are sick to the back teeth of hearing people talk tough. It's time for action. That's what people want, and I think David Cameron should just get on with it and do something that can actually be delivered. That's what he's doing. But he can't. But hold on a second. He said something yesterday that fell apart almost before the words were out of his mouth. He says tonight, yeah, I'm sticking to my guns on this, but I can't tell you any of the detail of how it will be done. That will have to wait until
sometime. The detail will be brought to the House when the legislation comes next month.
I think people probably can be forgiven for thinking he's making it up as he goes along. It's not good enough when people are struggling to pay their bills.
The woman at the very back there in pink. Yes.
What I think is absolutely shocking is that the London School of Economics has estimated that 27,000 people in this country die through excess winter deaths every year. But if a wee dog froze to death in one of our flats, there would be a public outcry. And I agree with Mark. I think that the fuel post should be taken into public ownership. But Margaret, what I think is really sad too, in 1982, I became involved in the community campaign at Easterhouse to find a long-term solution to dampness, fuel poverty and the associated health problems. In 1992, the people in this community demonstrated a passive solar energy demonstration project that reduced the heating bills to £5 a week.
How much has it changed in Easterhouse, the capacity of people to heat their houses? Is it getting worse or is it improving in your view?
It's worse because...
It's worse?
It's worse because now it used to be people regarded as fuel poverty when they paid 10% of their income. Now people, the working poor, the unemployed, are having to pay 35% of their income on fuel.
Margaret Curran, do you agree with the point?
Well, absolutely, yes, I know of that work, and that's very significant work that Cathy and many other people have done in Easterhouse, and it is to be very much respected. I mean, I would argue that I think there have been some significant improvements in Easterhouse, particularly around insulation. The point that you make, you can reduce people's housing bills through good insulation and through good housing investment, and some of that's been done. Sadly, some of the budget's been getting cut back now, so there is a bit of a setback in that, I would have to say to Nicola. But nonetheless, there is a real issue about energy prices, and I'm not denying that. Okay. And I have to say the government so far will not come forward with anything that seems to be actually effective. What we need to do is have much tougher regulation in the energy market, and we need to understand the pace of increased prices has been enormous, and we actually have to take effective action and really make the six companies behave and bring, when wholesale prices go up and they don't pass on when they come back down, they need to be made to do that.
We must move on because we've got a lot more questions to come. I'll take a brief point from you and then we must go on.
I just want to say that the problem goes beyond the prices, though, because you talk about the rate of increase of salaries compared to the increase of the price of fuel. I haven't seen a salary increase in over 4 years now, and I work in social care. Our salaries have been frozen for this whole period of time, and actually the last time that there was any talk, it was talked about it possibly being frozen for the next 5 years. Which, how are we meant to compete with rising prices when our salaries aren't improving either?
Okay. We better go on to we've got a lot more questions to go through, but you can join in tonight's debate if you want. On Twitter, as you probably know, our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow the Question Time account and our Twitter panellist, who's on our website. It's the second week we've had a Twitter panellist. And if you prefer to text us, push the red button to see what other texters are saying, and if you want to text your own comments, 83981. Question now, please, from Michelle Knox.
Do you believe Scotland would be better off as an independent nation?
Well, Scotland would be better off as an independent nation. The referendum, of course, in 2 years' time on this issue, so there's 2 years to talk about it, and we have about 10 minutes to talk about it here tonight. Margaret Curran.
No, I don't. I will be voting no in the referendum. It is... It's an historic moment. I think the partnership that we have across the nations of the United Kingdom works well and works effectively. I think it can grow and develop. We live in a changing world with climate change, with global economic circumstances changing, with terrorism. I think the time is not to build walls around us, but it's actually to work together, to pull together, not break apart. I also would have to challenge the SNP in actually what vision of independence they have. You know, sometimes, you know, the core argument, I think you'll hear Nicola Sturgeon say later on this evening, is that we need Scotland to be independent so that we can have full control of our economic levers. But I tell you, it's a funny vision of independence that we're getting from them, because exactly what will that control be? Because it looks like our interest rates, you know, that our mortgages will be set by the Bank of England, which will be effectively a foreign power. You know, even their chief economic advisor is beginning to say they're making this up as they go along. John Kay, that Alex Salmond used to quote a great deal. They're using a model where we split monetary and fiscal policy, which is essentially at the core of the problems in the Eurozone. Why we would now, at this particular time, want to borrow that, I don't know. It seems to me it doesn't stack up. It doesn't make sense. Why would we make our biggest market our biggest competitor? I think the partnership that is the Union works well. I think we can make Scotland a strong country. Devolution has worked. The one thing that will kill devolution is if we vote for independence. I want devolution to continue. It's either independence or it's devolution, and I think that's been the best deal for Scotland.
Okay. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, yes, I believe Scotland would be better off as an independent country, and just to balance it out, I'll be voting yes in the referendum. You know, our partnerships with the rest of the UK will always be strong. I'm the granddaughter of an Englishwoman, and I don't think it does anybody any favours to sow the seeds of division that people like Margaret try to do on this. Let me give you three big reasons why we'd be better off as an independent country. Firstly, I think it is better and it makes more sense that the big decisions about the future of our country are taken by the people who live here. If you asked anybody in any other country, do you think you're better off independent, they'd look at you as if you were daft, because they take their independence for granted. Secondly, we'd be better off financially. If you look at the last independent figures that are available, we're £2.7 billion better off than the rest of the UK. £500 for every person in Scotland. And thirdly and lastly, I think it would be right for us to be able to decide for ourselves how to invest Scotland's resources, to protect the kinds of things that Margaret's party now want to get rid of. Free education, free personal care, to have a decent welfare state instead of spending money on trident weapons of mass destruction. That's why I think Scotland will be much better off as a proud independent country.
But it wouldn't be how can you control your economic levers if your interest rates are set by a foreign power?
We have no control over interest rates right now.
Yes, we do.
Independence gives us fiscal control in order to grow our economy, to make sure that instead of watching the Tories dismantle our welfare state, we can invest in the things that matter to us.
Let me hear from some members of the man in the check shirt there, up there. Yes, you.
My question really is, let's just get to the rub of the matter. What model of an independent Scotland is it going to be based on? Is it going to be based on the austerity model? Is it going to be based on the Celtic Tiger in Ireland, which destroyed the Irish economy, which the SNP not so long ago were backing? By the way, Alex Salmond was very much a pro-Celtic Tiger. Is it going to be based on a race to the bottom? Is it going to be based on lowering wages? Is it going to be based on slice up the health services? Is it going to be based on keeping these energy companies and railway companies in the hands of big business? Or is it going to be based on, I would say, a socialist model based on the needs of ordinary working and middle-class people, based on bringing the levers?
What's your view?
My view? I think it should be a socialist model. I think it's got to be. I think it's got to be based on bringing. I think it's got to be based on bringing the levers of the economy.
To answer Michelle's question, Scotland could be an independent country, but not necessarily better as an independent country, in my view. There is no doubt that Scotland, there is nothing wrong with the idea of an independent Scotland. It could be independent, there's no doubt about that. Economically, Scotland could survive. Perhaps, almost certainly not as well as it survives now. But I do think, in answer to I'm sorry, you're the guy in the check shirt, that's your name now. The model is keep the Queen, stay in the Commonwealth, keep the pound, Let the City of London decide your economic policy. That is not the idea of independence that Nicola's activists will be demanding tomorrow and Saturday at our conference in Perth.
David?
OK. Hold on a sec. Went down there with spectacles and in another check shirt. Actually, maybe... yes.
It would be to Nicola in that if you take other independent countries about the size of Scotland, like, say, Ireland and Iceland, Alex Salmond was saying how wonderfully they were doing. Then if we look now that both of them have gone bust and need massive bailouts, if that's the future for Scotland, which unfortunately I think it will be, then that would certainly not be a reason to vote yes in a referendum. And sorry, but I can't think of any other reason why I would.
All right. You don't need to reply to each point. We'll just get some... The woman here in the front.
The referendum is 2 years away from now, but in the meantime, Alex Salmond has got legal advice, which has been paid by the Scottish Government, which is paid by me as a taxpayer. Why is he refusing to divulge what that legal advice is?
Sorry, which advice are you talking about? Joining whether Scotland will join the European Union?
Yes, with the European Union, yes. Why is he refusing...
All right, I get the point. I'll come to you with...
Why is he refusing to divulge what advice he is giving? What's he got to hide?
Nicola, this just for viewers outside Scotland, it's said that the SNP that took advice on whether they would be able to join the EU.
Yeah.
What was that advice?
Look, the ministerial code that binds all ministers, not just in Scotland but right across the UK, and this is a point Alan has agreed with in columns, says that ministers are not allowed to disclose A, whether they've got legal advice, and B, what the content of that advice is. If Alex Salmond was to answer that question, Margaret's colleagues in the Scottish Parliament would be making complaints about him for breaching the ministerial code. But does anybody seriously think that oil-rich Scotland, fishing-rich Scotland, renewable energy-rich Scotland would not be welcomed by the European Union with open arms? There's legal opinion. There's a former Director General of the Commission, a former judge,
Have you asked Barroso what he thinks?
former judge of the European Court that make it perfectly clear that Scotland would inherit the treaty rights and obligations of the UK.
Ruth,
that is clear. And the politics of it are even clearer still.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, we know, first of all, that the SNP haven't asked the European Union, because we've written to the European Commission and they said that you'd never asked them 13 years to tell you what it is.
One at a time.
The point that this lady raises is about information that you have sought and received about whether Scotland would be an accession state. And this is important for everyone, because it means, would we be spending the euro? Would we have to be part of the Schengen Agreement, which means would we have to have border controls? It affects every single part of our life. It affects what our corporation tax would be if we'd be in competition with people in England. José Manuel Barroso, the chairman of the European Commission, has already said that it is likely that we would have to be, and you're spending thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money keeping that information from the Scottish people, despite the fact that the independent Freedom of Information Commissioner has said that you should divulge it. Now, the Ministerial Code says that you shouldn't divulge information that's given by legal representatives unless there is an exceptional case.
Can we leave?
Now, the Freedom of Information Commissioner telling you that it is in Scotland's national interest for you to tell people is an exceptional case. And the reason you don't want to tell people is you don't like to answer.
Can we leave that point for a moment, Ruth? Would you answer the question Michelle asked? Do you believe Scotland will be better off as an independent nation?
I think that Scotland is better off as part of the United Kingdom. I think we have the safety and security of being part of a G7 nation, of being part of NATO, which is the best military alliance in the world. But I think we also have autonomy and decision-making over key areas of Scottish public life, on education, on health and on justice. And for those reasons, I think that we, in Scotland, have the best of both worlds. And I think if we look at some of the figures that Nicola has been banding around in the last few days, she's been talking up an awful lot about Scotland contributing 9.6% in taxes, but receiving 9.3% in spending, and suggesting that that creates a 2.7% overspill.
No.
It doesn't. 9.6% in taxes is 53.1 billion. 9.3% in spending is 63.8 billion.
But that's because the UK is in debt.
Well, that's because there's a deficit,
than the rest
which is that Scotland receives £10 billion a year more than it's contributing.
I don't think many people in Scotland can trust Ruth Davidson's figures. A couple of weeks ago, she said only 10% of people in Scotland contributed anything. Even Mitt Romney only managed to write off 47 more. 12% of
showed, you spent 2 days trying to knock the figure down, and when you found out that the equivalent figure,
the
figure was right.
Can I plead with you, panellists? Panel, please, don't have arguments that are arcane to most of the United Kingdom. May well be understood here in Glasgow.
Very well understood in Glasgow, let me tell you.
Well, I'm not arcane. As someone who failed O-level maths twice, I can't understand the figures. They're thrown at each other. But I want to say that I'm an emotional Brit, and the emotion in this argument is going to be as important as any of the figures these two are thrown at each other. I've got 4 kids, 2 live in England, 2 live in Scotland. I do not want them to be foreigners to each other. Now, no matter what Nicola says, that will be the outcome of an independence.
Mark.
Well, I'm Welsh. I live in London, and my father was a Polish immigrant. So in that sense, I'm looking in. And I start from taking the view this is a matter for the Scottish people. It's a good thing that there's a referendum. It's groundbreaking, and we should applaud the fact that 16-year-olds will get a vote, and I hope the rest of the UK will. And in that sense, I ask myself this question. My union has 30,000 members in Scotland. What we're doing is we're having a debate, a really thorough debate about what we think the effects will be on jobs, on the economy, on the type of society that people live in, and we will come to a considered view. Now, my opinion is that it's 2 years to the referendum. What this debate really deserves is something much, much more fundamental than just, is it the Union Jack or the Scottish flag? Are we foreigners or not? It is about this question. Whether you're independent or you're in the UK, if you have a party in power that supports privatisation, is neoliberal, who is in hock to the bankers rather than caring about the people, then frankly, both options are dreadful. If this debate was about an equal society, a redistribution of wealth, nationalising our resources, keeping free prescriptions, keeping no tuition fees, those are the issues that working people must demand are on the agenda. And in that sense, I just want to say this. I think it is shameful that Labour have abandoned politics and told people that the question of the union transcends everything else. Because when Alistair Darling does that on national TV, if you take him at his word, he's actually saying better to be in the union, run by the most right-wing government that this country has had for decades, and suffer while the bankers get rich.
All right, Margaret Curran. Thank you, Mark. Margaret Curran. Do you want to answer that?
No, I think Mark Serwotka's wrong. That's not what Alistair Darling is saying at all. Believe me, you won't get a more fervent, dedicated campaign against this Tory government and what they're doing to our communities than me. Believe me, I feel very strongly and passionately about that. But I won't buy an argument that says somehow you can't. The best way just to get rid of the Tories is to somehow pull out of Britain, because that's not the answer. This is a lifetime decision, and we would well live to regret it. And I heard Nicola Sturgeon agree with Mark Serwotka. He or she said, when he said, let's nationalise all the resources that we've got, you know, we can have everything free for Scotland. I mean, can I tell you, this SNP's hypocrisy has to come to an end. They are hiding behind the political choices that they're making. There are very serious consequences about what the SNP are doing to Scotland just now. If you look at the fantastic college that's just round the corner, there are waiting lists to try and get into that college. 10,000 kids are on waiting lists in college. Huge cuts. We've also got unemployment higher here now in Scotland we have in the rest of the UK. So let's don't let the SNP tell you that this is somehow not bad.
Let's leave aside what they're doing in office, because on the principle of independence, the woman in yellow there, because there's no guarantee that the SNP would remain in government and independent. You're not. I mean, the way you talk, you suggest you've given up on the Labour ever taking over power in an independent Scotland. Let's leave the SNP's policies as they are at the moment. We're talking about independence, and there'll be another election after that. The woman in the yellow. What?
It's about their vision of independence. Well, and they're conning people.
All right. Well, you've made the point. The woman in yellow there.
For those of you on the panel who don't support full independence, would you keep the devolution system as it is now, or would you support Devo Max?
Well, what's your view about that?
I would support Devo Max.
An increase in powers. Alan Cochrane, would you support that?
No, Devo minus is my option.
Eva Minus, what would you?
Rid of the Scottish Parliament.
What would you give up?
I just think that we have a Parliament with a huge panoply of powers, an incredible array of powers, which some work, a lot of them don't work, and we're about to get another load of powers through the Scotland Act passed this year, coming into force in 2015 or 16. The idea that we need to add to those before we've even worked out how the next lot are going to work is nuts. I mean, let's have a serious, considered debate about what we need to do, but for goodness sake, let's not dash into handing over another load of powers now.
OK. The woman up there in the very back on the left.
If Scotland became independent, we would no be better chance in it and going as a nation on our own than what we've been putting up with for the last 1900
So you would like it. Who is against? We've had 2 or 3 speakers for independence. Who's against the idea of independence? Are you, sir, in the back there with the spectacles on?
Who would pay off Scotland's part of the national debt? Where would you get the money from? You would have to add taxes. It's a figment of people's imagination that independence is great. Oil is reputed to have run out by about 2027, 2030. Where are you going to get the money from? If you're willing to pay £7.45, I think it is, the same as Norway to buy a pint of beer, then vote for independence. That's the way ahead.
And the man up there on the right there, in the second row. You, sir.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to ask Nicola Sturgeon why the SNP have taken 70 years to tell us how they're actually going to make independence work. They still haven't told us, actually. But I'd like to ask the unionist contingent, have they actually considered that when independence comes, they're going to have a plan too? And what are those plans?
Well, can I just pile in?
Do you want to answer that?
Can I just say, as I'm not in the unionist contingent, or I'm saying now people should vote yes, I think that what the questions have brought out, and what you've got to demand of these politicians here in Scotland, is that the debate exactly becomes about what type of Scotland will it be. Will it be a strong welfare state? Will it be more equality? Will it be one that challenges the markets, not let markets dictate everything to us? Now, if I lived in Scotland, and that debate showed me that independence with a government that was actually about equality and fairness, I would vote for it.
But I don't understand your point. You're saying a country can become independent only if it goes on getting the kind of government that you want.
No,
which doesn't sound very democratic. It sounds to me very undemocratic.
Because what I'm saying, David, is if I lived in Scotland, the fact of the matter is I would demand that this debate became about the issues that matter to people. And the problem with my analysis of Labour, I can't think of a worse time historically for the Scottish Labour Party to march rightwards, talk about giving up universal benefits, talk about cuts, when you should be speaking for hundreds of thousands of working people in Scotland.
The point is made. Alan Cochrane.
No, we are. That's exactly.
Alan Cochrane.
Mark said exactly the same stuff about Tony Blair's government, but I mean...
And he was right.
I did. And we were right.
Surely there is no greater argument. There is no more important argument than who we are. And that's the decision we're going to make in 2 years. Who we are. Are we Brits? Are we Scots? Are we Scots and Brits? It's who we are. There is no more important argument than that.
What type of society you live in?
No, who we are is more important.
You know what? I think we want to live in a kind of society where actually I think you're only getting half the story from your London house, in that all you hear about is free prescriptions in Scotland. What you don't hear about is the 2,500 fewer nurses and midwives that are on our wards across Scotland. You don't hear about the fact that people that are on £150,000 are getting free ibuprofen when we've not got a cancer drugs fund to treat people with rare cancers in Scotland.
This is a criticism of the way that the government is run in Scotland. Are you saying that with independence?
I don't think Nicola ever likes to take responsibility.
Are you saying that with independence Scotland wouldn't be able to have the government it chose? Surely that's when you keep on going on about what's going on now.
What I'm saying is look at the areas in where we can have a debate in Scotland, and there is a debate in Scotland happening right now which isn't actually to do with the Constitution, because, believe it or not, the Constitution isn't everything that's happening in Scotland. Yes, it's important. Yes, this is a fight that's going to go on for 2 years. No, I don't take any votes in Scotland for granted, and I will absolutely go door to door to door to promote the United Kingdom. But there are other things that people care about, and things like our healthcare service are important now, David, and they are things that we have to discuss now and make choices about.
All right, but what we're talking about is the referendum and whether Scotland will be better off. But we have, as you rightly point out, 2 years to debate this, and I think tonight we'll move on to another question. We have one from Joanna Tracy, please. Joanna Tracy.
The UK Drug Policy Commission wants to relax penalties for drug possession. How would this affect society and drug use?
This was the proposal that came this week for relaxing penalties, for generally easing up on the use of the law against the use of drugs. How would it affect society and drug use? Nicola Sturgeon, are you in favour of what was announced by the Drug Policy Commission?
I'm not generally in favour of relaxing penalties. I'm much more in favour in doing everything we can through education, through treatment, to tackle drug use and get fewer people using drugs, and those who are, make sure they get access quickly to the treatment and rehabilitation that they need. Now, drug misuse is a huge problem in Scotland, as it is in every part of the UK, but we actually do see drug use figures amongst the general adult population coming down. Amongst young people, it's at record low levels in Scotland. We see waiting times for access to treatment shorter than they've ever been before, so we're making progress, and I think what we need to do is continue with those efforts rather than relax the law. That's certainly my view, and what I think this government and other governments in the UK should continue to do.
But the UK Drug Policy Commission, which is a charity, admittedly, not a government organisation, says the Just Say No campaigns have had little or no impact. Longer jail terms on suppliers have no impact. Current prohibition is simplistic. And all the rest of it. You know what it says.
I know what it says, but I don't agree that saying you don't think the law should be relaxed in terms of penalties and sentences equates necessarily to advocating a just say no policy. I'm not advocating that. I think we should do as much as we can to educate young people about the dangers of drugs. When people do develop drug problems, I think we've got a massive responsibility to make sure they get the treatment and rehabilitation that they need. These are the things I think we need to focus on. We are focusing on them in Scotland. I think there's much more work still to do. It's an area where we have had a fair degree of political consensus in Scotland, and I really hope that can continue, because it's too important an issue to divide along party political lines.
Right. Do you agree that the current position of prohibition of drugs is simplistic, Alan Cochrane?
It probably is simplistic, and I would do everything that Nicola Sturgeon has just said, but I would still keep all the criminal sanctions in place, especially in terms of, alongside the criminal sanctions, I would do, and this is where Nicola's right in terms of a consensus, is there has got to be a different approach than dumping people onto methadone. Sure. Yeah. We've got to get more rehabilitation and treatment.
Woman in black there.
Yes. Should Scotland or the UK not consider the system that they used in Holland, which is, they set up clinics, and what they do is encourage drug addicts to go there, and that they're given heroin, 3 times a day by a nurse, and it's prescribed, and it actually removes all the criminality element of it. OK, I'll
keep that point for a moment. And the person there, yes, the woman there.
I've got real issues, Alan, with what you're saying, that you would keep the criminalisation of drug use. Who does it help to put a heroin addict into prison? That heroin addict who, proceeding in criminal activity in order to fund their heroin addiction, may well have families to support, may well be trying to hold down a job. Who does it help to remove them from society and put them into prison? Why do we not have a much better system for working around the addiction, for helping cure the addiction? Russell Brand was in the House of Parliament ages ago talking about a system of healthcare that helped him with his addiction. Why are we not moving towards his kind of holistic care rather than criminalisation?
No. Ruth Davidson.
Well, first of all, I have to say, I think that, particularly when it comes to dealers rather than individual users, I think there is a huge need for them to be removed from some of the communities that they blight in Scotland, and I think that criminal sanctions is the only way in which you can put people in prison to take them out of those communities. But actually, I agree with Nicola, and a lot of work was done in the last Parliament by my predecessor, Annabel Goldie, to bring forward a new national drug strategy for Scotland, which the SNP managed to implement because they were the government of the time. And it's centred very much on abstinence and rehabilitation, and it is about helping people who have identified themselves as wanting to make those sort of improvements in their life, trying to find a way forward. Now, I'm not saying that's working perfectly on the ground, but I have to give credit where credit is due, and there has been real will by the Scottish Government to make this happen. We've supported them in the past, and I hope that Nicola Sturgeon would acknowledge that, and that we are beginning to make some progress.
Do you want
in
to see
Scotland.
an end to the war on cannabis, as the Drug Policy Commission said?
Well, look,
I mean, you're talking about harder drugs, aren't you?
I am talking about harder drugs, and I think, particularly in my own area of Glasgow that I represent, the harder drugs are the real problem drugs for us, and particularly when we're talking about areas of methadone and heroin. My big issue is the number of people in Scotland who've been on methadone for, and sometimes decades, and have never been put in a reducing dose. Because methadone is about trying to wean people off of the drug, and at the moment in Scotland, in not enough cases is that happening, and that's where we really need to look. Because for people to go back to have lives that aren't chaotic, that's what we have to do, and we have to really make sure that the political will is there and that the services are there to support these people.
The man in green there in the third row.
I personally think you should actually try and get people, especially young people, involved in health-related activities, and I don't really see how you can possibly try and achieve this when you've got young people my age that want to use a football park for an hour and having to pay prices like £33 an hour for a game of football.
You have to pay £33 an hour. We're here in Easterhouse.
In Easterhouse it is.
To play football?
For
Margaret
1 hour
Curran.
in the park. Margaret Curran's actually my MP. I actually live in this constituency as well. So.
Well, I think that's one of the points that we've been making about, you know, we like to think we've got everything perfect in Scotland, you know, but there is a cost. If you freeze the council tax, there's often a cost for those kind of facilities. You can't provide those kind of facilities.
Who's going to charge you the actual costs of the PFI schools that you build?
I hate to say it, but it is a harsh reality of life. If you live in a world of finite resources, it is about what you prioritise. And if you don't take in tax receipts, sometimes it has an effect on the services you provide. But the principle of the point that you're making is absolutely right. You do need to have wider facilities for young people. I mean, in this part of the world, of course, the blighting communities is so strong, and we see it so significantly. Can I pick up the point about cannabis? Because Ruth is right about the very serious, drug use, and it is linked to criminal world. We see in this part of the world people illegally making so much money out of the poverty of other people and with the health, the exploitation of other people. That's completely unacceptable. And there's been a lot of action about trying to make sure that we deal with, people who are illegally dealing drugs and who make enormous resources out of it. But, when I've looked at that report and, we've had a debate about cannabis for some years in Scotland, and I remember some years ago this argument coming forward in the Scottish Parliament where they were saying we should soften the sanctions in cannabis. We shouldn't be so hard on that because the pattern of drug use around cannabis is very, very different from the pattern of use around heroin. But what we then went on to discover is actually cannabis use changed and it became a much more serious drug. And now we know that there's a link between very serious cannabis use and, for example, very significant mental health problems. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't just say that you can just wipe away problems with, indeed with alcohol as well, absolutely.
You want to come back?
Please. You're saying it's a hard fact of life that we should be having to pay £33, but see if that park, see if that park is lying empty and people are going down to use it, and this is a council-run park, then why are we not then being allowed access to that if no one is using that park?
I would absolutely support that.
All right. Let's one or two more points here. I'll come to you, Martin. Yes. Yes, you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, just to show the other side, it seems to be kind of hug the drug user sort of ethos in here just now, that we've got people up there saying about these clinics where you go and you get your methadone. Can anyone just pop up? So even if you've not used heroin before, can you just think, oh, maybe I'll go to these cafes like someone said up there they have? Could I go and then say, maybe I want somewhere that will give me something else free? Like, who's going to pay for this? Obviously, it might help longer term in terms of healthcare costs, but if you start kind of pushing out this, it's all okay, surely you're going to promote more use of these sort of drugs. And in answer to the guy about the football pitch, I find it kind of surprising that there's not pieces of land to play on, and maybe it's the type of people that frequent these areas that make them less desirable to go in there.
Okay, and the woman in the second row from the back.
I worked in addiction for 7 years, and the problem is that methadone is just readily given out, and the whole programme was about they would be put onto a methadone programme, and then they would be tested week in, week out to make sure that they weren't using illicit drugs. Because of the cuts in the social services, these tests don't go as well as they should do, and it's just a case that it's like a cattle market where they just come in, go out, and if they give a dirty urine, then it's okay, well, we'll actually put your methadone up. And I've seen that in so many cases where people's methadone just keeps getting put up and put up and put up, and they're not actually addressing the problem or what the actual addiction is.
Mark Serwotka.
Well, this was clearly a serious report, and I think what it raised was some questions we have to really soul-search over. It was making the point about alcohol deaths, smoking-related deaths, about the focus often on drugs, which can mean people being criminalised for personal possession of small amounts. And I think these are legitimate questions for people to raise, not because they're soft on drugs, but because we have to ask ourselves how much resources are being used, what is the effect on people, and we have to say to ourselves, drugs blights our communities. Clearly, dealers should be criminalised and taken off our streets. But if somebody is caught with a tiny amount of cannabis for personal use, should they be criminalised? Now, I think that's a debate that we have to have. And I think that the report was trying to say that the problem with successive approaches has been to say all drugs are the same, when clearly they're not. They all have the same effect, and we've got to be tough on it. And you end up losing the war on drugs. Scotland, proportionately, has had more drug deaths in the last year than any other part of the UK. So it's a serious problem. We've got to target what we do. We've got to understand the victims who live in the communities who are blighted by crime as addicts seek to feed their habit. But ultimately, I think we've also got to say the dealers must be dealt with. But if someone is addicted and in despair, putting them in jail for having some personal possession is not differentiating, and we clearly should differentiate and try and get to the heart of the problem and not treat everybody as the same.
Mark's right, but Mark's absolutely right, and so is Joanna, but one of the problems is they go into jail and they get more drugs. That seems to be as much a problem as anything else. There's more drugs in jail than there is on the streets.
The woman here in the back row, these three, yes.
I also work in social care, and most of the young people I work with use cannabis to self-medicate because they have been so damaged not only by their experiences but unfortunately by the care system itself, which is in crisis. So I don't think we need a war on cannabis. I think we need a war on cuts in social care, which leaves these young people feeling like they have no other choice.
And the man in the check shirt there on the left. Oh, there's so many check shirts tonight. Yes, sir.
You criminalise cannabis, but it doesn't matter. So many people that I know already use cannabis, and criminalising doesn't make it worse, and also telling them that it causes an increase in mental illness has not had an effect, in my opinion. Most of my friends will go on using it, and the only thing you're doing is you're making them use it in secret, and, you know, when you use something in secret, you have other problems.
So you'd ease up on cannabis?
I would ease up because we've got bigger problems with harder drugs. I'm not actually a cannabis user, but I have got a lot of friends who do use it and do use it recreationally.
Right. And you said in the front row, why are you laughing?
The question is, can you really trust the government with their drugs policy when they fire the independent advisers when they have an opinion that they don't agree with?
Yeah.
And you said, yes.
Surely we have to ask why people continue to use these drugs and want to have them. And part of that is because the economic tragedy that we've had for so long in Scotland. We need a government now that is going to start creating wealth instead of debt, teaching people about a financial future that will inspire them to do more, and then you actually give them a dream and a hope that can take them away from drugs. And this is unfortunately, while decades of socialism has destroyed that in Scotland, we need now a more libertarian-style government that will actually help people to take charge of their lives and actually make businesses work, create real employment that is sustainable and that will make Scotland into a tiger economy.
And I'll take one more point for the man in the second row from the back there. Yes, you, sir.
Hi there. Is it not the case if you did legalise drugs, it would be easier for the government to control it in terms of treating the people who would come to the clinics they set up? They could also, it would avoid the funding it does to crime. You could maybe reduce prostitution, because I imagine most of the prostitutes are drug users. So you would take that away, you could take away the big crime element. Surely that's worth looking at, because the war is lost. People are always going to take drugs. Let's be real.
OK. Let's. I think we've got time for one more question, and it's a thing that raised eyebrows throughout the UK when it was announced, because it was a contentious point in this proposal for the referendum on independence. Questions from Neil McIntyre, please. Neil McIntyre.
Considering 16 and 17-year-olds are not responsible enough to buy fireworks, why are we letting them have a vote in independence?
Is that so, that 16 and 17-year-olds can't buy fireworks? Is that right?
Yeah.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I don't believe that 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote at the upcoming referendum. The Scottish Conservative Party will be voting against it if Nicola does bring it to the Scottish Parliament.
Why was it agreed by David Cameron?
Well, I think what happened there was that he didn't want to set a new precedent by saying that it could not happen, because what is the agreed precedent is that the legislature that is setting a referendum is control of the franchise. Now, it's up to Nicola and the SNP, who've promised every 16 and 17-year-old the vote, to make that happen if she can. I was in a meeting with Alex Salmond much earlier this year, where he had special advisers and civil servants and the Electoral Commission in, saying exactly how difficult that was going to be for many people. So there may be thousands of 16 and 17-year-olds who are being promised the vote that won't get it. But I don't believe that that is the right age of consent. I believe the Electoral Commission has looked at this. They looked at it in 2004. They thought the franchise was about right at 18. I think the only major countries in the world that have votes at 16 are Iran and Brazil. So for me, the franchise and the mandate that the SNP have for this referendum is the mandate they won from the Scottish parliamentary election. So the people that vote in the referendum should be the people that voted in the Scottish parliamentary election.
Do you agree with that?
I'd like to know what the SNP have in particular to offer to 16 and 17-year-olds, and why they choose after the general election to change it down the way. What is it that 16 and 17-year-olds are going to do?
What are they going to get from you, or what are you going to get from them?
Well, what are the SNP going to promise voters, that, including 16 and 17-year-olds, is going to make any difference?
I take a really simple view of this, and it's actually not a view based on party advantage. We've seen polls recently, I don't agree with them, but seen polls saying 16 and 17-year-olds wouldn't vote for independence. You see other polls saying the opposite. My view is quite simple, and incidentally, I'd allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote not just in the referendum, but in every election. Why? Because if you are able to get married, if you can have children, if you can register to join the army, then why on earth shouldn't you get a say over who governs your country, and why shouldn't you get a say over whether your country should be independent or not?
You have to get parents' permission to get married.
No, not in Scotland.
Not in Scotland, Jim.
Not in Scotland?
Nicola, why did you want to raise the age for buying alcohol from 18 to 21?
Let's take this alcohol and fireworks issue.
If you're not old enough to buy alcohol at the age of 20, why are you old enough to vote at the age of 16, which is what you want?
Well, actually, there's good reasons. There's good reasons why you don't allow people to buy and drink alcohol at 16, because their bodies are not yet ready to cope with alcohol in the same way that adults can. You wanted to raise it to 21. There was a good argument. If you look at some of the communities I represent, alcohol and the antisocial behaviour caused by alcohol was causing misery in many.
All right, let's get back to voting. Margaret Curran.
This is an issue of principle about responsibility.
If I could break this discussion up slightly, I must say that I've had many representations about this from the constituency and throughout Scotland in the past few years, and I have to say I've been very impressed at the arguments put forward by that particular group of young people, and I have now come to the view I think the 16 and 17-year-olds should vote. I think if you can join the army and, you know, represent your country in the army, then I think it's reasonable for you to get some say in your country's future. So I do agree with that.
Just on the referendum or in parliamentary elections?
There's two big questions. It is nonsense, I think, to say to young people in Scotland that somehow you can vote in the referendum, but you can't vote in the European elections and you can't vote in the general elections. So I think it should be consistent. But secondly, I think what Nicola has to come to terms with, the SNP have been proposing this, I never heard that comment, the SNP have been proposing this for 4 or 5 years. They've been in government for 4 or 5 years. You know, I hope we're not going to get to a situation in the referendum, Nicola, where some 16 and 17-year-olds are going to vote and some can't, because that would be absurd. So you need to get your act together and make sure it's a fair and consistent approach to this.
The man in the tie there, yes.
Could the inclusion of 16 and 17-year-olds within the franchise for this referendum lead to the politicalisation of Scottish classrooms?
Especially when 1 in 5
I come to you, Maxis.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with kids in the classroom discussing politics. There's not enough discussion of politics in our schools. There's far too many kids are not taught enough about the party political system. There's far too many kids in Scotland think that Holyrood's the only parliament we've got, for goodness sake.
Do you want to?
That's right. Well, let's just examine this logically. You can get married, you can register to join the army, you can have sex, but critically, you can pay tax.
Yeah.
Now, I remember the old slogan about taxation and representation. And it seems to me that if people can pay tax and do all of those things, it's ludicrous to say you cannot have any say in electing your representatives or in the future of your country.
You can pay tax at 14 or 12.
Well, you're not paid to.
Well, of course you can. Film stars, actors, young kids who do that, they pay tax.
The point is 16-year-olds...
You said let's look at it as a matter of principle.
Well, 16-year-olds...
You can pay tax at 12 or 10
There are a lot of 16-year-olds who are apprentices who pay tax. There are a lot of 16-year-olds who are participating and paying their way. And to say to them that you can have no say in your society, frankly, I think, is not only patronising, it's completely unfair. And what I would say to people watching this programme outside of Scotland is the one thing I think we should say is Scotland is leading the way on this question, and we should have votes for 16-year-olds throughout the whole of the UK, in elections and in referendums. And I tell you what, if young people had a vote, maybe we wouldn't have the Tories giving us record youth unemployment, slashing public and treating young people in the most appalling way. If they had a vote, maybe you'd treat them with a bit more respect.
The woman here on the left.
We've had, you know, quite a few people in the audience mention Devo Max, and, you know, talking about the parameters of the referendum. I do believe 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote as well, but what I also believe is that the referendum should appropriately reflect the consultation that's gone on. I've taken part in a number of consultations on what should be involved in the referendum, and what is strongly coming through to me is that people would like to see a third question on the ballot for Devo Max, and I think that power has been taken away from us by Alex Salmond and David Cameron.
Okay. And the woman there in yellow.
I work with 16 and 17-year-olds, and I just want to make the point that I think a lot of them are far more mature and far more responsible than a lot of the adults I know.
A lot of 16 and 17-year-olds applauding. Actually, perhaps they're all 18-year-olds. What about you, sir, in the white shirt there?
3 of your panellists have mentioned the fact that you're allowed to register for the army at 16, but no one's actually said you're not allowed to fight in frontline service until you're 18.
That's true.
True. And take one more point. Who hasn't had a chance to speak? There are many people who have. Have you spoken before, sir?
No, I haven't.
No, well then have a go.
I think the idea of 16, 17-year-old allowed to vote was seen as the SNP sort of trying to gerrymander the election in their favour. But I don't think it'll matter. I don't think it'll matter. The Prime Minister allowed it. There's too many anomalies with independence that the people are not going to have it. There's too little favour. No matter what they do, one question will kill it stone dead when independence is defeated in 2 years' time. I think Nicola knows it's going to be good.
You lost me on whether you're in favour of 16-year-olds having that say.
don't actually have a particularly strong view on it. I just think that was the idea.
Okay.
I can see both sides. But
all right. Well, thank you very much indeed. You bring us to the end of our hour here. We're going to be in Slough next week. We have the Business Secretary, Vince Cable, on the panel, among others there. The week after that, just ahead of the American presidential election, we're going to be in central London. We have Jerry Springer, the opera, and David Miliband. First appearance since you-know-what on the panel. So if you want to come to either of those programmes, you've either got Vince Cable in your sights, or David Miliband, or Jerry Springer. Just apply on our website. The address is on the screen there. Or ring us, 0330 123 9988. Look, thank you all very much. This panel, this complicated discussion about Scotland's future, and to all of you who came here to Easterhouse to take part. Until next Thursday, from Question Time, good night.